boy, it's hard to believe that we're almost through with 2021, and quite frankly, it can't get in the rearview mirror fast enough. As I look around here, the only difference between this view that I have today and the view I would have had at the beginning of January is I'm not seeing masks, so that's a positive sign. We've stepped in the right direction with the vaccine, and there's a lot more people here. So appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for being in person. Thanks for dressing up. You didn't need to do that. You're not going to be on camera, but I'm glad that you did. I did not dress up. In fact, this is what my wife put on me. As you can see, I'm convalescing from my 51st birthday. I bought myself a brand new shoulder. Actually, that's not true. The company bought me a brand new shoulder. That's our medical plan is covering. So well on the way to recovery. Range of motion is getting back. Feeling really good. But it's great to be here with you. Great to have a fantastic speaker, Kurt Bauer, with us from WMC. We'll go through a little bit of announcements here, go through the business portion of our meeting, and then turn it over to the guest of honor. Before you see a list of incredibly fine sponsors that make this chapter happen. Were it not for their intellectual support, their intellectual capital and financial support, this wouldn't be possible. So I'm grateful that you were able to help us out as sponsors and work through us as we navigate this pandemic. I know it hasn't been easy for you. You certainly want to be able to see more folks, be able to press the flesh, so to speak, and that's what we're hoping that we can offer you when we get back to January. So thank you for your patience and support through this. As we go through the year, one of the things that I think is important is to make sure that we reintroduce membership to our sponsors, and we've gone through a couple of introductions last month. We'll go through a couple more this month as well. So I've asked Jeremiah School. I'm going to let Jeremiah introduce which company he's from, because I think that we might have an outdated slide here. And Sandy Freese from Wifley to come up and speak and present. So Jeremiah, I see you're front and center here, chomping at the bit, waiting to share with us some wonderful news. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit about yourself and your organization and how you can help our members.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, thanks for the opportunity to come up and speak a little bit. And really what I would like to just share is that Innova has recently merged with a company called Impact Networking. So I just want to share a little bit about that and what that means for us moving forward. That journey started a little less than a year ago when I had found out that Impact Networking was going to be moving into Northeast Wisconsin. I've always known about Impact Networking, have really had a lot of respect for their brand, and decided that it may be an opportunity for me to advance my organization to help my clients bring some more disciplines that have been needed for their operations. So I approached their business owner to see if that opportunity was there, and that really kicked off about an 8-month process of us getting to know our organizations, each other, the leadership teams, most importantly our cultures. And we found a lot of synergies and ultimately led to us bringing our organizations together about 2 months ago. So we will be retiring the Innova brand here in the near future, but Chelsea and I will be continuing to, invest in our mission of trying to build a world-class IT organization here in Northeast Wisconsin that obviously provides us a tremendous amount of additional resources, not only for our clients, but even for you guys as part of the membership here of FEI. So that allows us to bring, more educational resources to you guys and a much more depth of discipline within the IT landscape. So I do want to extend a special thank you out to the membership and the leadership team here at FEI. Our involvement over the last 3 years has been really special for us. And we look forward to continuing that support of the group and, providing that additional educational resources for you guys as we continue over the course of the years ahead. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Jeremiah, thank you, and congratulations on this merger. I wish you the best of success. And I'm glad that it was Impact that bought you, because as I was going down to my in-laws' house and passing Lake Forest, and I see Impact on the just north of the Oasis. I thought they were a tool and die manufacturer that was growing like a weed because they were always adding buildings. But my understanding is it's a data center and their headquarters, fantastic, great organization. Okay, speaking of growing organizations, Wipfli's been growing like a weed. And Sandy, if you will, please share with us a little bit about yourself and your fine organization.
Good afternoon, and I think, as I was telling Eric, this is my first in-person keynote since February of 2020. So it's great to be here, and it's great to see how many of you are attending, so thank you. I am Sandy Fries, for those of you that don't know me. I'm an audit partner with Wipfli in our Appleton office. Wipfli is a top 20 CPA and consulting firm. As Jay mentioned, yes, we are growing like weeds. I think I joined the firm in 2008, and we maybe were a few offices in Wisconsin and Illinois, and now we are currently over 3,000 associates across the U.S. We have 40 plus offices now in the U.S., India, and the Philippines, and over 300 partners and principals. So even with just the 13 years that I've been with the firm, we're really growing, and we continue to grow. Some of that growth is through acquiring other firms, as well as organic growth. The partner group at Wipfli, we've decided we want to keep our legacy and stay Wipfli. So we've been doing a lot of the M&A activity through acquiring other firms across the U.S. Our firm is made up of roughly a third of our revenue is roughly audit and tax services, or a third audit, third tax, and a third consulting. The industries that we primarily focus on are manufacturing, retail, and distribution, construction, real estate, healthcare, financial institutions, and nonprofit and government. I would say probably this last year, the top 5, 6 consulting services that we've been helping clients with is definitely around cybersecurity, Industry 4.0, succession planning, recruiting for all types of different industries, and definitely the M&A activity. We obviously are seeing a lot of our clients either being acquired currently or being sold, and a lot of them that are being acquired is really by a lot of the PE firms. So we're definitely seeing a lot of PE firm activity in Northeast Wisconsin. So if you have any additional questions, I'll be here after. Sarah Funk, one of my partners, is here as well today. But otherwise, we thank the board for allowing us to be a strategic partner. I don't know how many years, but it's a long time that we've been a strategic partner. So thank you for allowing us that opportunity.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you to Wipfli. Today's honorarium is, at the request of Kurt, going to be paid to the World Orphan Fund. I would encourage you to take a look, if you have a chance, at this organization's website. Don't confuse it with the World Orphan Foundation. It is not that at all. This is actually a Wisconsin-based volunteer organization with a wonderful mission. 100% of the donations to this organization are put into play, because it's 100% volunteer. So there's no administrative costs at all. It's the most efficient not-for-profit that there can be. So thank you for allowing us to make that contribution.
Thank you.
Speaking of getting involved in something, when I made my plea, call me naive, but when I made my plea and mentioned the fact that we didn't have a third vice president to take over Cynthia's position in a couple of years, and that she would retain that position into perpetuity if nobody steps up. I'm sad to announce that I haven't received much interest. So I suspect that they figure, Cynthia, that you're going to be a wonderful president, and they're going to want to retain you for years to come. But no, in all honesty, if you're involved in these events, right, and you're religiously coming to these keynotes and professional development sessions, you're already 80% of the way there. If you would be willing to invest just a few more hours, right, and a little bit of intellectual capital, that's really what it takes to be a board member. I'm still amazed that they let me on the board, not to mention the fact that they let me stand in front of you and assume this role of presidency. So if I can do it, I am absolutely confident that anybody else in this chapter will be well equipped to be able to take over this position. But you see the names up here of individuals within leadership. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out. You know, when we get into January, and Cynthia, if that position is not filled, that's when I start to pick up the phone and make some cold calls. So if you want to avoid the pressure of a hard sell, like Mike McNamara did to me several years back, thank you, Mike. One of the best things you've ever done for me. But please take an opportunity to reach out to one of us and learn a little bit more about what being on the board has to offer. Would love to be able to see you give back to this organization the way that it's been rich in giving to you. Today's session, quickly, you know the drill. You've been here many times. If you want to receive credit, if you're in Zoom land, you're going to have to stay through the entire presentation, answer questions at the end. If you happen to be here in person, I hope you put your John Henry or Jane Henry, if you will, on a piece of paper out there, which will give you the CPE credit. And don't make a run for the door. That'll get that CPE credit revoked. Okay, be patient. There's a survey coming out after this, so I'll talk a little bit about why it's important for you to answer this survey if you haven't done that before in a little bit. We've got a virtual peer group meeting that's coming up on December 9th. The thought process is, Denise tried to do a hybrid. The hybrid was a little bit clunky. They're working their way through. This is designed to be an entirely virtual session. I think the thought is, as COVID starts to clear, if we get into a little bit warmer weather, I'd like to go back to an all in-person, but we'll keep you posted on that. Anyway, this is virtual. There's no travel involved, so if you have the opportunity, sign up. Your commitment is a couple of hours. Again, no travel, and Denise would love to have you. Denise would also like to offer you the opportunity to lead the peer group as she starts to think about her transition as well. So there's a great opportunity for leadership in this chapter with this group. We've got a new prospective member, Lindsay Wisman. She's the manager of tax, treasury, and risk at American Packaging Corp. Thank you, Beth, for making that introduction. Lindsay, there's two types of financial professionals in this world. There's those that are members of FEI and those that wish they were members. So we look forward to the opportunity when you can become a full member. But thank you for your interest. And speaking of those that no longer wish they were members but are members, Liz, I'm sorry you weren't able to make it, but Liz, it's great to have you. You're an accounting specialist. Thank you, Ken Larson, for the introduction. Happy to be adding to this wonderful chapter. All right, this is why the survey is so important. January, right, we're going to get together en masse. We're going to break bread together, celebrate each other's success, get reacquainted, right? Libations, heavy hors d'oeuvres, maybe even a sit-down meal. We're still trying to figure this out. The venue is undetermined. So part of what you will do in this survey is you will help us select where we're going to have this meeting. So I'm looking forward to your contributions in figuring out where I'm going to be showing up on January 27th. But great opportunity for us to come back together. Hope folks can make it. No keynotes, right? I may say a few things, I may not. We may have Larry Barton speak just to bring back past presidents. We don't know. Completely up in the air. So again, if you can devote the time, put it in your calendar. I know weather conditions get a little bit dicey, but would love to have you there. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Kurt Bauer, Keynote. So I became acquainted with, well, first of all, let me ask this question of the folks in the audience. How many folks are familiar with WMC? Okay, everybody's hand is up. How many are paying members of WMC? Kurt, you have a wonderful recruiting opportunity here of potential potential companies and clients. So I became familiar with WMC in 2004 when I was with Baker Tilly. At that point in time, we sponsored the Manufacturer of the Year award, and that Baker Tilly, WMC, and Michael Best and Friedrich are still sponsoring that. So started it off, and I can't even remember what year we might be in. It's been a while since I've
About 30
attended.
years.
30 years. Outstanding. Celebrating the success of manufacturers in this fine state. But at that point in time, I remember the witty banter that Jim Haney and Tim Christian used to have back and forth. And as Jim was retiring, I thought, is there ever going to be anybody that can keep pace with Tim and be able to put Tim in his place? Because few are able to do that, if you know Tim. Well, Kurt not only stepped up to the challenge, I think he trumped Tim on several occasions, and I greatly appreciate that. That was wonderful to see. But when you look at the long line of leadership within this organization, it seems like 25 years is the tenure for a president, and I know you're 10 years in, and I wish you 15 or more. I really do. But I couldn't be more proud of the way the business climate has changed for the positive under Kurt's leadership. And that's not happenstance. When I think of WMC, I think this is an organization that is the biggest cheerleader, the biggest coach, if you will, of business within Wisconsin. Were it not for this organization, right, our state chamber of commerce, I doubt that we have the success that we do. So Kurt's going to let you in on a little inside baseball about what's going on in this fine state. And with that, Kurt, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me. I appreciate being here in the Fox Cities. My wife is from Appleton. I met her in Arizona, but she's originally from Appleton. I brought her back to the state of Wisconsin, and when it gets to be this time of year, she's not very happy about it. But be that as it may, and actually she's the one who introduced me to the World Orphan Fund. She's a special ed teacher, trying to save the world as best she can. I joke she tries to save the world one three-legged black lab at a time, because that's our dog, and of course she had to get one that had special needs. But she got involved with the World Orphan Fund, which is founded by a friend of mine, R.J. Johnson, who's been involved in Wisconsin politics for many years. And then she had a chance to go down to Guatemala and Guatemala City and see some of the fine work that they're doing. And it's heart-wrenching stuff, and it's work that needs to be done. And it's been particularly challenging during COVID, because people, a lot of the contributions to those types of organizations dried up. So thank you very much for the kind contribution in my name. I'm proud to have that contribution. So Jay said that I've got to speak for 1 full hour or you don't get your credits. I'm not used to speaking for a full hour. I usually do about 20 minutes, maybe a half hour, although I can be a bit of a ham once I get going. So I've got my cell phone here. For some reason my watch doesn't work, so I've got my cell phone. I'll check in periodically to make sure that we don't go over, but more than likely we'll probably finish up a little early, and then we can take some questions. Although I do have quite an agenda. I've got 8, technically 7 agenda items that I want to talk about. If we're going to look at the state of the Wisconsin economy, we really have to talk about COVID, and we have to talk about what's going on nationally and globally. So we're going to talk workforce, we're going to talk supply chain, we're going to talk inflation, where we are with COVID-19, and we're going to talk some stroke of pen risk that's out there, because we've got a lot of things going on, particularly in Washington. We have divided government in Madison right now, so you really do have checks and balances. Whatever the governor wants to do, if the legislature doesn't want to do it, they block it, and vice versa. So right now, of course, in Washington, we have Democratic control, at least ostensibly, because of course you've got the divided U.S. Senate. Kamala Harris as vice president is a tiebreaker, but nevertheless it's difficult to get things done. But I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and the impact that it has on the Wisconsin business climate and our national business climate. Then if we have time, I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we should have learned from COVID and we should have learned in the supply chain crisis that we're facing right now. So let's start with workforce. This has traditionally been the number one economic challenge the state has been facing. We're at 3.9% unemployment right now. Nationally, it's 4.6 rather. So we're doing better than the rest of the country as a whole. Is it really because we have all the jobs, or is it because we have a demographic crisis? And the answer is yes. It's a combination, really, of the two. Wisconsin hasn't been at replacement birth rates since the late 1990s. And about that same period, we stopped having the same number of kindergartners starting K-12 as we did high school seniors leaving K-12. So it's a math problem at this point. And if you talk to the folks at the Applied Population Lab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is the official demographer for the state, they'll say, you know, we've been warning about this for years. And most economists will tell you, not all, but most, will tell you that if you don't have increase in your working age population, it's awfully hard to have GDP growth. And that's the situation that we face in Wisconsin. And of course, COVID's made it worse. In fact, and everything that I'm going to talk about today, it's either caused by COVID or been made worse by COVID, because we've traditionally had a very high labor participation rate, usually around 67%, 68%, which is usually around the fifth highest or the fifth best in the country. That always surprises me. That means that 30% roughly of the workforce that's of working age is still out of the workforce, and yet we're doing better than the rest of the country as a whole. But be that as it may, right now we're at 66.2%, which is quite low for us, better than the national average, which is 61.7. Where we are right now is ninth best, so we've dropped about 4 percentage points. And what I'm told is that each percentage point constitutes about 40,000 workers. So that's a significant number of people that have left the workforce during COVID who have not come back. And you've seen, I'm sure, the stories about this. Where did they go? Why did they leave the workforce? Was it because that they were downsized? Maybe they were in hospitality. And why haven't they come back now that we're hopefully getting beyond COVID-19 and the economy, at least the demand side, is coming back? This is a huge challenge for the state of Wisconsin. It's not easily solved because we can't send a bill to Governor Evers, or we can't necessarily solve this thing without federal help. So let's talk about what some of the things that you can do to try and address a workforce shortage that we have. But by the way, the demographics of the state aren't going to get any better. It's not like we had a surge in birth rates during COVID, and quite the contrary. Even though people were home, I imagine because of the concerns that they had, people were not having children. People are getting married later. It's very similar to what's happened in Japan and what is happening in Eastern Europe. You can monitor, what has happened to those economies as a result. They have stagnated. There's a real challenge there, and we don't see anything on the horizon that's going to change at least domestic birth rates. And that's not just a Wisconsin problem. That's much of the United States and much of the Western world as far as that goes. So when you're looking at solutions for workforce, we talk about talent retention, talent attraction, talent reintegration, and automation. Let me start with automation. We're hearing a lot of this right now in industry. Manufacturers in particular are investing millions of dollars in automation. The prices actually are coming down. But the problem is that eventually you need somebody to handle a product. I won't tell you the name of the manufacturer, but it's a signature brand that if I mentioned it to you, you would recognize it. But this CEO told me recently that they have invested $30 million in automation over the last 3 or 4 years. But he still said that I'm going to put my next plant in Georgia because they don't have the population problem that we do. That's a real problem for us. I talked to a CEO of another company that has 6 locations in Wisconsin, another signature brand that you would recognize if I mentioned it to you. They're making a major investment down in Mexico because they don't have the workforce here. As it is, they say, we have difficulty filling shifts. First shift's not too bad, second shift's a little iffy, third shift it's hit or miss whether or not we have enough people. That's a real problem for us. That's going to really chill investment in the state of Wisconsin. So automation is not the solution for this. And the interesting thing is that when I talk about workforce challenges with lawmakers, either federal or state, they'll often say, oh, don't worry about it, the robots will come and save us. That's not the case. That creates problems of its own. You can replace some line workers, but of course then you need higher skilled engineers and programmers to manage those machines. So it's not the solution. Ultimately, we need people. So let's talk a little bit about talent retention. So the bottom line is that we need to try and attract or retain every born and raised Wisconsinite we possibly can. We also, and I'll get to this in a minute, we need to bring them back if we can. That's why I went to Arizona, to bring my wife back to Wisconsin to solve that talent crisis. But what we try and do at WMC is make sure that young people are exposed to the career options that we have. Wisconsin has a diverse economy. We're America's dairyland. Sometimes we fuss about that, although we represent agriculture and dairy as well. But it creates a perception that if you're going to come to Wisconsin, you're going to work in agriculture. That's actually not the case. Manufacturing is our #1 sector at 20% GDP. Healthcare would be second, sadly government's third. Financial institutions and real estate is fourth. We've got a diverse economy with lots of different jobs, and a lot of kids are not exposed to them. So we do something called Manufacturing Month in October. We also do something called The Coolest Thing Made in Wisconsin, designed to expose young people to manufacturing careers by showing off all the cool things that are made in the state that they have no idea because no one's talking about it. We need to do a better job in K-12 in making sure that young people know about the job options that we have. So we're also trying to work with K-12 on guidance counselors that aren't focused solely on disciplinary issues. We want them to actually be guidance counselors, somebody who sits down and talks about what types of jobs that you have in your community that you might be interested in. We certainly want business tours and plant tours. We want internships and summer jobs. All of this stuff helps people decide whether or not they want to pursue a career in a certain area. Another thing that we think would help, the tech colleges and even the universities have advisory boards. I was just with the dean of the engineering school at UW-Madison yesterday. They have an advisory board. The tech colleges have an advisory board for every degree area and certification that they have. And what that gives you is a real-time information from practitioners in the field to the educators on what's happening in that field of study and what types of skill sets they need. We don't do that at K-12. I had a chance to talk to the Wisconsin School Boards Association not too long ago, and I pushed them to instigate something like this because I think that would be an incredibly valuable tool to make sure that there's that communication between K-12 and the business community. And I realize, all of us in business, we're so busy on day to day. I mean, when I call a manufacturer from a small or medium-sized operation, unless you call their cell phone, you're not going to get them because they're not in their office. They're on the shop floor solving a problem. So while they are frustrated with the fact that there's a labor shortage, oftentimes they don't know the steps that they need to take in order to try and solve it, which is contact your K-12 superintendent or tech ed director. We've got to take it upon ourselves in order to create that pipeline. I've visited almost all of the tech colleges in the state, and if you talk to them, The businesses that are doing well are the ones that are involved with the tech college, whether on that advisory board giving machinery or doing something in order to create that pipeline, and then they get the first pick of the litter. And what's happening right now, certainly at the tech colleges, and I heard this again yesterday at UW-Madison, is that these students are getting offers, multiple offers before they even get their degree or their certificate. Many of them in, say, welding are being offered jobs after just their first or second semester, depending on the recommendation from their instructors. Interesting enough, at UW-Madison yesterday, the dean told me that a graduating engineer at UW-Madison will typically have 7 offers waiting for them before they even graduate. That's a lot different than when I graduated in 1991 and it was recession, and I didn't have any job offers, although in fairness, I was political science and history and not electrical engineering. So talent attraction, well, what do you do when you don't have enough people? You got to bring people in. To me, this is a no-brainer, and we struggled with this with our elected officials for many years. We lobbied Governor Walker to create a talent attraction campaign to try and draw people in from neighboring states or people who have Wisconsin ties, because we have seen this. Wisconsinites will go someplace else for a while, but they remember their childhood, and when it's time for them to maybe start a family, they remember, the schools are good, the communities are safe, outdoor recreation access. It's a great place to raise a family. I grew up in Beloit. It's a great place. So there's always that opportunity if you tell your story, and what we will often say, per Jay, what you said, we do have a rehabilitated business climate in Wisconsin. We're more competitive than we used to. I often say we're the best kept secret in the upper Midwest. That doesn't do anything for you. That secret needs to get out, so you got to tell your story. So we finally were able to get Governor Walker to initiate a talent attraction campaign through the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. It wasn't terribly well funded. It was about $10 million, but I do think it was very well researched. It actually piggybacked off a survey that we did about 7-8 years ago now. We recognized even back then that we had a problem in the state of Wisconsin, and so we needed people to come in, and what would make people want to move to Wisconsin. So we commissioned this nationwide survey, and we asked people, so what do you think of Wisconsin? What kind of job would you get in Wisconsin? What would get you to maybe move to Wisconsin? And the survey came back with some pluses and minuses. On the minus side, they literally thought everybody would work in agriculture. We're America's Dairyland. That's how we advertise to ourselves. On Sundays, you see Packers fans wearing the cheese head. I mean, people take that to heart, and it's a stereotype that kind of sticks. The other thing that we found very disturbing is that they saw Wisconsin as intolerant. We didn't really delve into that. This was just a survey. We didn't do follow-up focus groups, but we think that had something to do with the Act 10 demonstrations that we had in the early part of the Walker administration, but we're not actually sure. On the positive side, they know that we have a low cost of living. We have high quality life, high quality of life. We have outdoor recreation, as I mentioned earlier. The Packers are certainly a benefit. The Badgers, the Brewers, now the Bucks. They recognize all of those as attributes. So there were a lot of positives to work on. So we finally got the governor to allocate some funds. WEDC took our research, did some additional research, and decided that they were going to focus on the Chicagoland area, Iowa, the Twin Cities, military, and anybody who had attended a Wisconsin institution of higher learning and had moved someplace else. So somebody in the UW system or the private colleges and university or tech college. And they targeted veterans because Wisconsin actually has the highest number of benefits for veterans of any other state in the union. So the military pays for your final move when you muster out. There was an opportunity there. And we saw some benefits from that talent attraction campaign, but unfortunately when Governor Evers took over, he decided to discontinue it, and we have been unable to convince him to reinstate it. In fact, we just sent him a letter with a coalition of other trade associations and local chambers of commerce asking him to consider putting funds back into that campaign in order to draw people in. The other aspect of this, of course, is legal immigration. My grandparents came here from Germany to work in factories in Milwaukee, and then eventually moved down to Beloit to work at Fairbanks Moores and the Beloit Corporation. And that's a story that pretty much everybody in this room could probably tell. We're a nation of immigrants, and frankly, we're going to have to look to our past in order to solve the problems of the future. And I know that there are other challenges related to that, because we've got some housing shortages in Wisconsin, even in our bigger population centers. But there again, I think we have an opportunity to look to the past to find solutions for the future, because if you go to the American Club in Kohler, which is right across from the Kohler factory, that was built as a dormitory for immigrants who were coming to recruited to work in the factories. That's something that I know some of our members are looking at again, and at least one of them down in the Janesville area is building temporary housing for their workers. Same thing is true in Beloit. Beloit recruited African Americans to move up to Wisconsin from the Deep South during World War I and World War II, when men were drafted into the military and sent overseas, and they built housing for them as well. So that's an opportunity. But one way or another, we have to get our leaders in Washington, D.C. to work with us on some form of sane immigration reform. And I won't get into all of the different alphabet soup of visas, but one is called H-1B visas. You probably know it. It's the high skilled. So that's your engineers. It can be somebody who has a higher certification from a technical college as well, but typically when I think of an H-1B visa, I think of an engineer. You have the UW system and our private colleges and universities who attract the best and brightest from around the world to get advanced degrees in any number of disciplines. When they receive that degree, we sometimes give them a visa and a green card, but too often we don't. Instead, we give them their degree, a world-class degree from a world-class university, and then we send them home to compete against us. Doesn't make any sense at all. It's insane, in fact. They cap H-1B visas arbitrarily at $65,000 per year. And why they can't just decide that we're going to basically have it be needs-based. And if any of you have ever had anybody with an H-1B visa in your organization, you probably also know that it takes a team of lawyers to try and get one of those. It shouldn't be this difficult. We have tremendous opportunities. Again, I'm a University of Wisconsin-Madison graduate, and so I'm a bit of a homer. But when you're walking around that campus, or Platteville, or Eau Claire, these are tremendous recruiting opportunities for us to bring in people from overseas and then to keep them. The best and brightest in the world. So that's something that I think we ought to consider. We certainly reached out to the Evers administration and ultimately the Biden administration about the Afghan refugees that are at Camp McCoy, or Fort McCoy rather, about their status and whether or not we'd be able to keep them as well. I had a lot of my members contact me and say, hey, if they're going to be here, I've got plenty of work for them, and we can figure out the language barriers if there are any. So there's a tremendous amount of demand out there from the business community and a lot of willingness for them to work with people. So immigration certainly has to be the ultimate key. Talent reintegration, again, we've got a lot of people out of the workforce. Where did they go and why? Is it transportation? Is it childcare? Are they concerned about COVID, lingering health concerns? We need to figure that out. One thing that I will say, and actually when you look at the labor participation rate, it doesn't include people who are incarcerated, but Wisconsin actually does a very good job at the Department of Corrections of training inmates before they are released. But what they don't do is they don't do a good job of connecting with the business community to try and place those inmates with companies. So we're trying to work with them to have work release. it's a program that they were doing pre-COVID. They still haven't reinstated it because of COVID, but you get an opportunity for an inmate to work at a company and establish himself or herself, and then have a career option waiting for them when they're released. The problem is that the way it works right now is when somebody is released, they're sent back to the zip code where they offended, which we think is insane. They need to be able to go where the job is. Sending them back to the zip code where they offended typically brings them back into the influences that led them astray to begin with. But if there's a economic benefit here, there's a societal benefit here. Getting people on a career path can keep them from reoffending. So let's talk about workforce. I told you that once I get up here, I'm a bit of a ham. I'm only through one talking point, and I realize I only have a half hour, so I'll have to talk a little faster. So supply chain is obviously a big deal, and we survey our membership twice per year. And for, I would say, 8 of the 10 years that I've been at WMC, workforce has been the number one issue on that survey as far as a concern that the business community has. I'm going to wager that when we do it in January that supply chain will overtake it. The supply chain challenges are related to the workforce issue, but it's primarily, of course, COVID. When you shut down large portions of an economy, not just here, but in Europe and in Asia, there's going to be consequences to that. And what happened is that we went into a COVID-caused recession, and a bunch of businesses laid off workers or furloughed workers, and they canceled orders. And this happened all around the world. And then suddenly, things started to get better. With all the stimulus money, people had money for items that they wanted to buy, and suddenly the demand went up, but the supply chain wasn't there. And as you well know, you can't just flip a switch and have it turned back on. And even if you can, the transportation system isn't ready, and that's what we're seeing. So it's a combination of this tremendous demand for products and services, the fact that so many of these companies around the world were shut down, and many of them still are. Some places are still having challenges with COVID, and you're seeing lockdowns and shutdowns. And then you're seeing the supply chain, the shipping, the rail, and trucking, because of course you've probably heard there's a tremendous shortage of both day cab truckers and long haul truckers. No one wants to go into that, and I think maybe that goes back to the conversation we were having about automation, because what's probably the number one profession that everyone said was going to be replaced by automation? Trucking. Well, a lot of people heard that, and so maybe they decided that there's not a lot of longevity in that career. Well, the interesting thing is the experts I talk to say that we're at least 10 years, probably 15 years away from having autonomous trucks driving down the interstate, and even then they won't be completely autonomous. They'll have some human being in there. So bottom line is that that's probably a myth, but the reality is that the damage is done on the supply chain. What I like, when I talk to reporters about this, I like to use the analogy that what happened really is like a really bad accident on the freeway. I used to live in Phoenix, and the traffic down there is as bad as LA. So when you have a accident during rush hour, it snarls everything up. You're at a complete stop. And COVID, of course, is the car accident, and the supply chain is the traffic. And if it doesn't completely stop, it slows to a trickle on the edges, and I think that's what we're seeing right now. But even as things get back to normal, and the traffic, the accident is cleared, it takes a while for the traffic to resume a normal flow. So the big question that everyone asks is, when does that happen? I have no idea. I was on a call yesterday with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. They don't know. I've talked to numerous experts. They don't know. Of course, it's going to happen in increments, and it's going to be different for different types of sectors, because there's shortages of computer chips and steel and you name it. I mean, there were shortages of aluminum. There were shortages. Jack Daniels couldn't get glass for their bottles. I think you're going to see it slowly get back back to normal, but it's going to take a while. And I'm really not very good at prognosticating this, but I think you're looking at least the second, probably the third quarter at the earliest of 2022. But we'll just have to see what happens there. Inflation. Well, first we were told that this was temporary or transitory. Then we were told that it's a good sign that the economy is actually recovering, and now we're being told don't worry about it because we all have a lot of money to spend. And we have seen wages go up. We have seen, of course, a lot of stimulus dollars being thrown around. But the reality is that while wages have clearly gone up, and you all know this, if you know you're financial professionals, you know better than anyone. But the inflationary pressures are much higher than what we're seeing wages go up, and particularly for lower income individuals. I'll just give you some things that I pulled up yesterday. Bacon is up 20%, steak is up 24%. I think actually it's higher than that because my son just recently had, I cook Sunday dinners at my household, and that's when we have the birthday dinners. He wanted steak. I went to Costco to buy it, and I had sticker shock. It was interesting though, but thank God I wasn't buying a prime rib. That was in the case next to it, and they're usually around $70. They were well over $100. Breakfast cereal up 4.5%, eggs up 11.6%, furniture is up 12%. That's if you can get it. There are, I just talked to somebody yesterday that said that they're waiting 6 months for a sofa. Durable goods like washers and dryers up 16%. Also, if you can get it, you're probably going to wait at least 6 months to get it. Used cars are up 25%. New cars, I didn't notice it when I drove by Bergstrom's, but I drive by at least 4 auto dealerships on my way into the office. I live in Middleton. We have an office downtown Madison, and I drive by a Toyota lot and a Nissan lot and a Ford lot. It looks like they're out of business. They don't, particularly Toyota. They don't have any inventory. I've got a Ford, and it's about time for me to get a new one. And I mentioned it last time I got an oil change, and the guy laughed at me. He says, "Yeah, good luck." Well, maybe next year. So I mean, there's huge shortages. Sporting goods are up 8.7%, and like I said, wages are just not keeping pace. But the two areas the one area I think that you really need to watch is energy. Energy is up dramatically. We're looking at gasoline and natural gas is up 59%. And let's just put that in perspective. In Wisconsin, 78% of homeowners heat their house with either propane or natural gas. And of course, propane is a product of natural gas. So as that goes up, that's really going to eat into people's budgets. And most people don't have that kind of discretionary income or savings. This is going to be the one that kills people this winter financially. Hopefully, we don't have a situation like Texas. In fact, we've talked to our utility members because we were concerned about that with the supply chain disruptions, and they tell us they've got plenty of supply. They're not worried about that. You could see problems in like what happened in Texas. In southern parts of the country where they're not used to getting the cold weather, but short of a pretty nasty winter storm, I think we'll be fine here. The concern in Wisconsin is cost. And of course, let me find the quote. Thomas Sowell is one of my favorite economists, and he says about inflation, it's the most universal tax of all because it really does hit the low-income people the most. It's very regressive, particularly energy prices. So, how you heat your home, how you drive to work, that's going to be a big issue for a lot of people this winter, and it's really going to have an impact. The question with inflation is, does it lead to stagflation? Does the economy begin to slow down as a result of people out of the workforce because higher prices will slow down maybe consumer spending? Does that lead us to Carter-era stagflation, which is a combination of prices going up while the economy is slowing down? I don't know about that yet. I mean, we'll have to see. I asked the Federal Reserve that yesterday. They're pretty good about not answering questions because, and they probably don't know either. But my guess is that they're worried about it because there are some warning signs. I was listening to Stephen Moore, who's another one of my favorite economists, and he said, look, you've got the lack of workers, that depresses GDP growth, and the fact that some of the GDP growth that we're seeing right now is probably caused by inflation as opposed to real activity in the economy. That makes me nervous. I should have said as a disclaimer in the beginning that I'm a pessimist. So this is not uplifting. This is not a motivational speech. Part of it is, just to go on a tangent on that, WMC's official mission statement is to make Wisconsin the most attractive place in the nation for business. Our unofficial mission is to solve Wisconsin's economic challenges. So I do tend to focus on a lot of the negative, and the reason is that if you're trying to solve problems, you focus on where the problems are, and that's typically where negativity. So anyways, let's keep moving along here. I just kind of lost my place. There we go. COVID. So COVID has been a real kick in the shins for the economy. I mean, it has made our economy sick, but I also think that the government response to it has also exacerbated the problem. I didn't talk about this when I was talking workforce, but paying people $300 supplementals above what the state UI pays is not helpful to try and get your economy back to where it was. I understand why they did it initially back last summer when they came up with a $600 per week supplemental. I mean, we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into. COVID scared everybody, and we laid off some people at WMC, and I'm a relatively small employer. But you kind of have to do what you have. You have to do what you have to do in order to make sure that you survive a unprecedented, once in a century event. Where you don't know where it ends. So I understood when Congress passed that $600 supplemental, but when President Biden came in and he passed the American Rescue Plan and added that $300 through Labor Day, it was completely unnecessary. We were absolutely seeing a rebound. We knew actually probably 6 months into COVID that people were hiring people back and that the economy was going to self-correct. Because it was artificially depressed because of what we were doing in COVID. I mean, Wisconsin's been a state for 172 years. We've never shut down our economy. Fortunately, we didn't shut it all down. Fortunately, we kept the manufacturing sector going because it's 20% of the state's GDP. And we did get a chance to work with the Evers administration on framing who was labeled essential. Which kind of breaks my heart because everybody's essential as far as we're concerned, but we were in a pinch and we wanted to make sure that manufacturing and the supply chain that supports it were labeled essential so that they could keep working. And I think that that's one of the things that has buoyed the Wisconsin economy and allowed us to come back as quickly as we have been. What concerns me about COVID, of course, is the lingering after effect. Again, we've got people out of the workforce who are concerned. They don't want to come back to the office, or they don't want to come back to the shop floor because they've got health concerns, either theirs or family members. You understand that, of course, but it is certainly problematic to getting back to where we were. And of course, the real concern, I think, is do we have another mutated variant, one that would be vaccine and therapeutic resistant? That would be devastating. We are seeing cases spike here in the north. Makes sense, it's completely predictable. We saw cases spike in the south during the summer because everybody goes inside, because I used to live in Arizona. You don't want to be outside in the summer in Arizona. It's awful. So people go inside and the cases spiked. And of course they dropped here in the Midwest where the weather's nice. Now we're seeing the reverse of that. We are seeing continued hospitalizations in Wisconsin. We've got some vaccine hesitancies out there. And that's a challenge that we have too, because the OSHA emergency temporary standard, according to our survey, would cost about 80, almost 90% of our members, about 40% of their workforce. The people who are not vaccinated feel pretty strongly about it at this point. The vast majority of people who are not vaccinated made that choice because they have concerns, one way or the other. They have concerns. There are very few people out there that are unvaccinated because they haven't been able to get to a Walgreens or a clinic. I think we've done an extraordinary job as a nation, not only developing those vaccines, but getting them manufactured, distributed, and administered. So people who want the vaccine can get the vaccine. The people who are not vaccinated don't want to be vaccinated, and that's a real challenge. And of course, from our perspective, we don't want those people being forced out of the workforce because we thought that emergency temporary standard was completely unworkable. We thought it was unfair. The business community has done their fair share in keeping people safe during the pandemic. We've rearranged workspaces, we put up barriers, facial coverings, how we clean our facilities. We've done what has been asked of us, and we've also, particularly in manufacturing, retooled in many cases to provide critical medical supplies. And of course, I mentioned the pharmaceuticals. I mean, that they developed and manufactured the vaccines in record time. So our members were not happy about that. I talked to one today, one who's actually very close with the Biden administration, and he tried to communicate to the Biden administration that this was going to be completely unworkable. I mean, think of it, even if you've got a facility where all of your employees, over 100 employees in one spot, that's a challenge. Now think of if you're a operation with multiple locations. Think if you're an operation with multiple locations, including out of state. You have to proctor the COVID test. There's not enough test kits for that to even happen. There aren't enough medical people in order to do it. You can do it online, except that you can't have somebody, a medical professional from Wisconsin, test somebody from Iowa, because you can't do virtual medicine over state lines, at least not currently. So there are all kinds of different challenges that would have kept more and more people out of the workforce. So I will try and end on a positive note, because I do think that we control our own destiny. And what we should have learned from COVID, and then we should have relearned it because of the supply chain issues, is that we need to control as much of our own destiny as we possibly can. So let me explain that. When COVID happened, we recognized that we didn't have enough medical supplies in the United States. We didn't have enough PPE. We didn't have enough ventilators. While most of the therapeutics and pharmaceuticals were developed here at taxpayer expense, by and large, it was manufactured someplace else, largely in China. And you may recall that when President Trump at the time referred to the virus as the Wuhan virus, the Chinese threatened to cut off our supply of all of those things because they were upset about that. That's a big warning sign. And we need to make sure that we are manufacturing critical supplies, whether it's medical or military, here in the United States. And so how do you do that? It's really not as hard as one would think. One is you need the available workforce. And I realize that I just got done saying that we've got a workforce shortage, but we're the United States of America. People want to come here. People are dying to come to this country. We can recruit the best and the brightest, and we should be able to decide, just like every other country does, who comes into our country and whether or not they contribute to our economy, our society, our culture. That's an easy one for us if we've got the political will. The other one is energy. We were energy independent 2 years ago for the first time in many decades. Energy, of course, is the master resource. I already mentioned 78% of Wisconsinites heat their home with domestic produced natural gas and propane. We have abundant supplies of both, and then you add in coal. We have centuries worth of the stuff in North America between Canada and the United States. And we were really controlling our own destiny. And energy is the difference. The cost in energy is the difference between a manufacturer being profitable and unprofitable, from a manufacturer being competitive or uncompetitive, because of course manufacturers use a disproportionate amount of it. Now I recognize your concerns about global warming and climate change, but the reality is that you can use particularly natural gas, and President Biden even acknowledged this very cleanly. I mean, the scrubbers that they have on the natural gas-fired plants are nothing short of extraordinary. And the president himself said during the campaign that natural gas needed to be a bridge fuel, recognizing that alternative energy is not capable of replacing fossil fuels, and it's not. And of course, we've completely gone away from nuclear, which of course has zero emissions. For whatever reason, we have decided as a nation that we're not going to invest in nuclear. But you cannot power a factory right now with just solar panels. One of our members, and I'll tell you who they are because they just won our Business Friend in the Environment Award, Ashley Furniture. They have massive plants around the United States, and they have solar arrays on top of all of them to supplement their energy costs. But they'll tell you that while it still generates energy when it's a cloudy day, the production drops off dramatically. One of the things that happened down in Texas when they had that storm that froze everybody out is that their wind turbines froze. Wind turbines and solar are intermittent. They're also not storable. You can only store that energy for about 2 to 3 hours. Now, the technology will get better, and they're working on it. But the president mentioned that he acknowledged the technology isn't there yet. We need fossil fuels. And the president said, well, it's OPEC's fault. But the first thing he did is shut down the Keystone XL pipeline. And he also then withdrew a variety of leases and permits for drilling on federal lands out west or on waters offshore. Obviously, that's having an impact on the cost of energy. There's no question about it. I don't blame this on OPEC. We can produce it ourselves. And why would we want to enrich OPEC? Many of their members are either geopolitical rivals or economic rivals. They're not our friends. So we can control our own destiny on energy. The final aspect that I think could really make us competitive is on taxes. So we were at 35% corporate tax rate, which was among the highest in the world. I think there were three other countries that were hiring, and one was the Sudan, for God's sakes. 35%, we lowered it to 21%, which is below the global average. So we were competitive. We're below China. We were about where the UK is, still higher than Canada and Ireland, but still. That was a dramatic reduction. And now we're talking about raising it back up to either 28% or 20. I think the Build Back Better plan in the House is at 26.5%. Even if it's at 25%, it's still too high. And it affects our competitiveness. But what I would recommend is that we adopt at the federal level what we have at the state level, which is the Manufacturers and Agriculture Production Tax Credit, which basically zeroes out your production or your taxes if you produce and your production is here in the United States. So it incentivizes production and jobs in the United States so that we can control the supply chain here closer to the United States. And I don't think it solves all of our problems, but I think it would solve a great deal of the challenges that we're seeing right now. So Jay, I think 7 minutes before the bottom of the hour, so I'll pause there and see if we have any questions or comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on anything that I have to say or what you're hearing out there. The first question was, where are we in 5 to 10 years? The second question relates to the perception survey that we did at the WMC Foundation about 7 or 8 years ago that came back and showed that Americans see Wisconsin or Wisconsinites as being intolerant. As I indicated, it was a survey, so we didn't follow up with focus groups. We gave all that data to the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation, and they did do focus groups. If they did anything on the tolerance issue, they didn't share that with me. I don't really know. I mean, like I said, we assumed that it was related to, because it was maybe a year and a half, 2 years after the Act 10 demonstrations with these massive crowds at the state capitol that made international news. I'm really not sure otherwise. I can speculate. Wisconsin it has been rated the worst state in the country for African Americans. Milwaukee has been one of is the most segregated major city in the United States. We incarcerate more African Americans per capita than any other state in the union. I don't know that was being reflected in that result, but those are all factual. We're certainly leaving a lot of people behind. It's a scandal. The pre-COVID, I don't know what it is now, pre-COVID, the unemployment rate among working age African American males in Milwaukee is 35%. We've got jobs. We've got the jobs. So, more energy needs to be focused on that, honestly. When we bring this up, people get real quiet real quick. And we don't understand. These are people who, African Americans, I'm from Beloit. African Americans were recruited to Beloit, Milwaukee, and Racine to work in factories. And many of those factories then eventually they moved production to Asia. I think we owe it to do more to get people gainfully employed, because the best social program is a job. It wasn't. Oh yeah, the question was, will interest rates go up? And specifically, did I get any insider information from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago on my call yesterday? It wasn't just me, by the way. It was a group of folks, but there were several bankers on there that tried to push them on that. Obviously, they're always tight. I used to be on the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago's advisory board. They're very tight-lipped. They listen a lot. They like to listen and not talk. It's clever of them. Frankly, more of us should do that. But my guess is that interest rates will eventually have to go up. I mean, the Federal Reserve, one of their key objectives is to manage inflation. And you do that by raising interest rates, by slowing the economy. That could be another thing that leads to stagflation. In fact, I had that on my notes, that under the stagflation, I should have brought it up. But I think interest rates have to go up. But if you're the Federal Open Market Committee and you're sitting around, you're looking at some really crazy numbers. The economy wants to get back. What I would argue more than anything, this economy will bounce back if government just gets out of the way. Stop interfering with it. Now I realize the Federal Reserve is a little bit different, but the government needs to get out of the way of this recovery and let it happen. We are at the bottom of the hour, so I did fulfill, I was a ham, so thank you all very much. I appreciate it.
Kurt, thank you for making the trip. I'm not sure if your in-laws are still around, but if you have a chance, please stop by. You're close in the area. Thanks for taking some very complicated concepts and distilling them down into something that we can consider, and hopefully they can become actionable. When I was just starting out my career, I was out at a manufacturing client as a young public accountant, and the owner took me aside. He said, "I want you to know that there's only a handful of things that actually add value to this economy." He said, "You either mine it, you make it, you move it, or you milk it. Everything else is just a matter of trading dollars." And he smiled at me because he knew that I wasn't making anything other than copious notes in our audit work papers. But he was right. He was right. And when I look at what we have here in Wisconsin, we have the ability to do all four of those things. So I hope we figure it out. We get out of our own way. But the reality is it's up to folks like us. Right? We're the ones that are going to make a difference. Government's not going to solve the problems for us. We need their help. But it's up to us to have that resolve and fix these problems. So thank you for your participation. Take these great ideas, figure out a way to make action on them. That's it. That's all we have. That's all we have. That's for the folks on video. We are going to enjoy libations and hors d'oeuvres next door. So I hope those that are on video have a good bartender. I know that we do. So with that, thanks again for being here. Folks, have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you back, hopefully, at the location of your choice in January.